Patch 32.2 has given new life to a lot of different comps. Nagas are probably one of the biggest winners of this patch, being one of the most flexible tribes with the ability to easily transition into multiple comps, having a ton of value generation, and having their own ability to scam and anti-scam other comps. On top of this, they also have some of the best internal scaling with a new comp as a result of the changes in this patch. In the early game, generally you will use your 2-drops of Thaumaturgus and Zesty Shaker to provide a lot of stats to stabilize. There are also some very good econ units between Shell Collector and Warden of the Old that you're very happy to take. And finally, Gladiator is a very strong mid-game unit that once you have a couple of spells, it will generally be able to 2-for-1 very consistently. Finally, Coilscar Sapper is right now one of the strongest 3-drops in the game and will on its own enable you to play multiple of the Naga comps. It provides a ton of value in the mid-game and allows you to also effectively transition into any of the either comps. The best comp right now with Nagas will center around Groundbreaker. Groundbreaker was in a bit of a rough spot in the last patch. However, with the addition of the Darkrest Strategist, it now has the ability to buff its own stats very quickly. The way Groundbreaker works is for every 4 spells you played during the game, it increases the internal buff that it gets, and then whenever you play a Naga, that internal buff stats are applied to it. So effectively, if you've never played a spell during the game, the first time you play a Naga, you'll get this 1/1 buff. Every 4 spells, that 1/1 now becomes a 2/2, a 3/3, etc. What effectively this does is you have this multiplicative effect between the number of spells you've played and the number of Nagas that you have. Obviously, if you haven't played a lot of spells, each Naga is not going to do a lot. If you've played a lot of Naga but don't have the spells, then the buff you're getting isn't very strong. So really, you want both of these. And without the Darkrest Strategist, there really wasn't this way to generate a lot of Nagas in the previous patch. The comp really will be enabled solely off of that early Coilscar Sapper. And like I said, Coilscar Sapper is right now the key to pretty much every Naga comp. Because this, as a 3-drop, has the ability to get you that 5-drop Darkrest Strategist as a spellcraft, as well as its own ability to just get all the other good spellcrafts in the game, like Divine Shield, getting a gold, it can potentially let you discover spell with Sylvanas, etc. So really, the way that I kind of see this going is you'll play just early game through tier 4 however you are. Ideally, you would have picked up the Sapper sometime in that, in those first couple of turns. You'll then eventually find a Darkrest Strategist, you'll eventually find Groundbreaker, and then you've been having all these spells. You now have a way to generate Nagas, and that will be kind of how you scale from there. Even with the nerf stat line of Coilscar Sapper, I don't think you can really understand how much value this single card provides these tribe. Spellcrafts have so much value. They have the ability to generate gold. They have the ability to give Divine Shield. They have the ability to discover spells. It's just a ton of value. And even if this minion was like a 1/1, it would still be providing everything that you could potentially want. You can potentially get 8 spellcrafts from the single minion if you find the Reborn and you've made it gold. Obviously, this runs into even the problem of you might have too many cards in your hand, so obviously pay attention to what spell or minion generation you have that applies at the start of the turn. Something like the the pendant that we use in the game in the background. I end up missing a couple procs because of just having too many spellcrafts, and it's almost funny to say oh, I have too many spells as a problem. So really just make sure you're counting that, but really the biggest thing to this is the multiplicative scaling between the number of spells you play and the number of Nagas you find. Because of Sapper's utility, he makes it so you can easily transition into 2 other comps that are also going to be pretty competitive comps. The first one of these is the AoE Spellcraft comp. This really centers around having some type of like AOE spells. Nagas have this alone with their with their fire scale hoarder, um, and they can also potentially do those buffings via party guest. Where Sapper comes in is if Sapper is generating you these reborn spellcrafts, those reborn spellcrafts can be played on the fire scale, it can be played on the party guest, and give an extra spell every turn via the death rattle. The Sapper will obviously eventually be subbed out of the comp, but it really just gives a very good unit to let you flex into that other S tier comp. And really, you would only be doing this if you don't find the Groundbreaker synergies. And generally, I would only transition into this comp if you find the early Fellfire Conjurer, you have that Sapper, and you have some type of AoE spell synergy. Commonly going to be either the Fire Scale Hoarder or the Party Guest. You can potentially also flex with Fauna Whisperer. The second comp that Nagas can easily transition into is going to be some version of Poison Scam. If you're looking into playing the Groundbreaker comp, you'll oftentimes pick up Bran as a add-on unit because he can help with the spell generation. You would love to have a Bran when you find early econ units like Shell Collector. It also lets you flex like the Rodeo Performer. So Bran will generally be an add-on unit to that comp until you have too many other scaling units. What Bran also allows you to do is easily transition into Murlocs. The Poison Scam build obviously focuses around having Belcher and base skills, and generally you're going to be discovering a lot of those units using Primal Fin, which has the Bran synergy. Bran also allows you to easily transition into that previous AoE spellcraft or AoE spell comp because all of those AoE spells are also from Battle Cries. The reason why Nagas are going to be stronger now with the Poison Scam comp is they have brought back the Dagger Spine Thrasher. What this minion does is you can play 3 spells every turn and give it 3 bonus keyword effects. These 3 bonus keywords will always be Divine Shield, Wind Fury, and Venomous. This provides a really strong unit that can generally trade 1-for-1 with the Venom and then provide an extra utility with the extra hit because the Divine Shield's going to protect it the first time. Having 2 of these makes it so you can effectively trade 2-for-2 on the opponent's board, and then between base skills, Belchers, and potentially just having a big unit of your own, you're going to be able to effectively trade the board from there. The biggest thing with this is now a new Venomous unit that was really missing from the previous patches lineup. Before, Murlocs were the only tribe that had some type of Venom option, and you're really the only other scam units you could potentially play was Leroy. The other thing that's kind of relevant with Nagas is, again, coming from that early Sapper, you might end up playing it on your late game board if you've already gotten golden base skills, golden Belchers. Obviously, you want to be having the golden base skills to pull a minion from hand if you're playing the Sapper, because you're effectively playing down a unit. But the Sapper can provide you a ton of utility in these scam comps. Obviously, some of the biggest ones you can find is something like Glow Scale to give you some Divine Shields. That's an extra proc. Additionally, these are going to be spells that you can proc to your Thresher every turn with. Generally, I wouldn't actively transition into this comp, but I would only keep it as an option if, and only if, I haven't found another big scaling comp and I'm really just desperate to play something. Really, Poison Scam generally is just a way for you to try and, save a top 4 kind of thing. It's very hard to win with, especially if you don't have that 1 to 2 actual minions. However, Nagas do have the potential that you have just one really big Groundbreaker, and then just play Poison Scam utility on top of that. The final comp that's relevant to Nagas that you could be flexing throughout the game hasn't changed a lot from the previous patch, and that's the Death Rattle Cyclist comp. This, like the other Naga comps, will be enabled by having early spell generation, most likely from the Sapper, and the scaling payoff to this comp, rather than Groundbreaker stats, comes from the combo of Showy Cyclist and Titus. Generally, your late game board will consist of 1 to 2 Cyclists, 1 to 2 Sappers, 1 to 2 Titus, and the rest of your board filled up by Divine Shield Nagas. With this comp, it's also very easy to have a Cycle Spellcraft slot in your board, just because most of your scaling comes from in combat, and that you can naturally just get the stats the next turn and potentially play your glow scales, whatever, in the comp. Something that's kind of relevant is if dragons are in, you can do Poet plus Amalgams as Naga, and that can give your Showy Cyclist buffs as permanent buffs to those Amalgam units, and just be a way to have even stronger minions that, every turn are now scaling rather than it just being an in-combat buff. Final thing to kind of talk about with Nagas is just some of the flexibility that they have from trinkets. Obviously, they're going to be doing okay with any type of spell generation. Trinkets just, those are very typical value generators, and you don't really need to kind of think of them any differently with Nagas than you would any other comp. But there is a little bit of extra payoff just because you want to be playing spells with this comp anyways. Some of the Naga-specific trinkets that you can potentially think about, Archaic Scroll as a lesser trinket has the ability to generate you a ton of value. Especially if you have that early Sapper, you have some early Zesty Shakers, you can potentially get 2 to 3 procs of a spell generator every turn, and this will generally provide you a lot of value. The most important thing to this is I would only take the Archaic Scroll if I have that early Sapper. Otherwise, I'm just not going to be able to get enough spells for it to actually be worth it. The next trinket that's worth thinking about is the Charming Panpipes. This gives a 1/1 buff at the end of your turn, and it increases every time you play a spell. Obviously, with Nagas, you're going to be playing, potentially 10 to 15 spellcrafts every turn, and that's going to just be a good way to stabilize. Potentially, by the end of the game, you might have something like a 100 buff here that you're getting every turn. And this makes it very easy to transition into that AoE Spellcraft comp, because taking Drakari, which is one of the big enablers for the Felfire Conjure, having Drakari will proc that stat buff an extra time every turn. Another one to think about is Deathly Phylactery. This is especially going to be strong with the Cyclist comp. However, in the mid-game, you can use it to proc your Sapper an extra time, which is just going to give you a lot of value in the mid-game. We talked about how there's a lot of utility, there's a lot of value that you can get from Nagas now in their spellcrafts. So just having an extra, 2, maybe an extra 4 spellcrafts every turn will just provide a lot of value there. Additionally, if you pick that up, you have the ability to transition into those AoE spellcrafts again. Because these are death rattles, you can get out of the Sapper and still have a payoff from your lesser trinket. The final one that I think is worth talking about is Guiding Candle. Obviously, Groundbreakers, getting them scaling early is very important, but there's also 2 payoffs in the 6 drops between Party Guest and Silvas. Obviously, Party Guest will allow you to transition into that AoE spells very easily, and Silvas will just give you a lot of value generation throughout the game with the ability for you to pick a spell every turn. Generally, in your game, the best thing that you can do in the Naga comp is you'll have your scaling units of Groundbreaker or that Showy Cyclist Titus, and you'll have whatever scaling you do with Sapper or something in the game, and your last couple fights, especially when you're in a top 2 scenario, you should transition into using Thrashers, and you kind of see the late game board that I play in this comp ends up having 3 Golden Groundbreakers and 2 of those Thrashers, and just I'm trying to play as much utility as I can while still keeping all the units that I've scaled throughout the game. So anyways, hopefully this is a good breakdown for where Nagas are and helps explain why they're so strong in the current patch. I definitely think this plus the AoE spell boss will probably be the strongest comps in the current season. So good luck on your guys' climbs. Hope to see you out there. Bye.